Hey guys, welcome to Keep It Spiritual with myself, Chris Meredith. Now, in this episode of the Keep It Spiritual podcast, I bring you the fabulous Patrick Keller of the Big Séance Podcast. Now, Patrick Keller, first of all, he's a fabulous ball of light. Absolutely love his energy. He's so uplifting, but got such a great positive characteristics as a person. I absolutely love him. But of course, the Big Séance Podcast, it's massive. Of course, it's in America, but it's all around the world as well. They investigate hauntings, paranormal, mediums, anything, life after death, paranormal experiences. There is nothing that they do not talk about on the Big Séance Podcast. It's a fabulous listen. It's very balanced as well. I absolutely love how Patrick really talks you through the right balances. He's a little bit of a skeptic sometimes. I think he's a bit of a believer at the same time. But he has a fabulous guest on the Big Séance Podcast. If you've never heard it before, if I'm bringing it to you after this video and podcast, make sure you go and check him out. Give him a massive like because he is absolutely fabulous. And, like I said, he's just a great guy. That's all you need to know. And of course, it's the Big Sance Podcast as well. So really hope you enjoy my fabulous chat with the lovely Patrick Keller from the Big Sance Podcast. Podcasting royalty, you are Patrick Keller. Welcome to the Keep It Spiritual show. First of all, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I'm really excited about this. It's been a while since I've done any kind of video interview, so I had to brush my teeth and fix my
right, get everything sorted.
Fix my pandemic hair.
Well, you're looking great, Patrick. You're looking great, and I've got to say thank you. For making an effort. We appreciate it.
No problem.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, many people, Patrick, will know you from the Big Séance Podcast, which is just fabulous. So first of all, as a listener, loving it, absolutely loving it. For anyone that doesn't know, what's it all about?
Well, the Big Séance Podcast really came from out of my blog, really, from about 7 or 8 years ago. I started blogging, and that came out of my what I've always called my spiritual shift, because I didn't grow up as this paranormal, spiritual, focused person. It was just something that hit about, 15 years ago now. And I started a paranormal investigation team, really nerdy stuff like that. I started an obsession with reading books, especially books about psychic mediums or books written by psychic mediums and the afterlife, and that I needed a place to write, to vent, to ask questions, to explore everything that I was going through, because you might know this, we don't necessarily in our normal everyday life have people that are cool with just chatting it up about questions about ghosts and psychic mediums, and my partner is, or my husband is, very cool with this, but he's not, he tolerates it, and he's very sweet and kind, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He's like
exactly the same there, Patrick. You know what I mean? His partners are kind of like, that's your thing, that's great, you do what you've got to do and I'll do what I've got to do.
Yeah, there's like a little inner eye roll that happens anytime, a topic comes up. So I needed a place, to, talk about that. And so the blog came out of that. It was just the Big Séance. And then, the podcast came after that. So it's really about all kinds of things, paranormal and spiritual. It could go down more of a ghost hunting, paranormal investigation route, but there's also lots of psychic medium stuff, and my endless question of what is life like, on the other side is always a big, heavy topic and question.
It is. That's one of the biggest topics right there, because that's the question that all of us want to know. It is, because so many people out there do fear death, and working with so many psychics and mediums, and saying don't fear it, it's just like going into another room. But that question, what is it like when we die, it's a massive question for everyone, isn't it?
It is. And you mentioned fearing death. That is the biggest thing and the first thing that I got out of And I really got it pretty quickly, like very early on in my journey of all of this, within a few books. I was like, wow, I don't fear death. I don't fear death anymore. And I, of course, was running away from being a Southern Baptist and religious dogma, that you kind of grow up with, and that took a while. And so you had all those questions about dogma, and so that was kind of freeing up and disappearing. And I was like, this is pretty cool. It doesn't mean that there still aren't questions.
No, of course.
And I'm still skeptic about quite a few things, but I didn't fear death. That was the main thing that I've kind of gotten out of it.
I love that. I love it. Well, like you kind of went into it there. I mean, your topics, that you do cover on the podcast, it's so vast, which I love, from ghosts, obviously hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics, mediums, and life after death. So would you say life after death is one of your favorite topics to cover, or is there another one?
I think it is. I think life after death, what happens when we transition, what we can do on the other side. One of the nerdy questions I always ask is, can I build my own house? Do I just think about where I want to live and it happens? Has someone over there from a former life or a family member, do they have a house for me? Do I, is there communal living that I have to live in? Is there a dorm? Things
That's
like
so
that.
Funny, but those are the questions, because a lot of people say it's very similar to where we are now, but obviously it's in a different dimension. So of course, we've got surroundings, we've got houses, are we still going to have to be paying electricity bills and all that kind of stuff? We want to know. These are the kind of questions. But I absolutely love that is one of your your main talked about topics and one of your favorite kind of questions to ask, because that's the questions we want to know.
And I have a really healthy eating disorder. I love me some food. Am I going to have that same struggle on the other side, or do I choose how hot I look, or do I care about those things? And or do I not look like anything? Am I just a ball of light? I mean, the questions are endless.
They are. They really. That's one thing what I love as well. We've got so many, mediums and psychics that we can ask these questions to, which is great. It's an ever-going play field for us, which I absolutely love, Patrick. So, I mean, why do you think people are so fascinated, with all things kind of spiritual, paranormal, life after death? Why do you think people, and yourself, why are you so fascinated with it?
I don't know. I think back often to growing up in my childhood, and people always say that children see spirits and are more open to these things, and then it kind of fades as the real world puts expectations on them and tells them that it's silly. And I often wonder, did I have paranormal experiences that I'm not remembering, or because I didn't, to my knowledge, didn't grow up in any kind of haunted house. I didn't have a lot of paranormal experiences. And so, like I was saying earlier, all of a sudden it's weird that I had this passion hit, because I didn't have a lot of experiences. And it was the combination of, like I said, those books, and someone convinced me to read, a book. I think my mom said, "Hey, I read this book. You might want to check it out." And of course, really, and I know a lot of people get embarrassed to say this, but like TV shows like The Ghost Hunters, Paranormal Investigation, TV, I'm not embarrassed. I mean, I am kind of embarrassed to say that, but that was one of the things too. And so I didn't realize that I was so fascinated by those things. But what kid, I guess, isn't fascinated by a ghost story?
Well, ghost stories are great. And I think, you mentioned that you shouldn't be embarrassed, because I think, like the TV shows, we had one over here called Most Haunted. And that, like when I was growing up, it brought it into kind of, the wider public arena that, people speaking about ghosts, there's a medium there, there's a psychic there. And it's kind of like, wow, what is all this? They're holding seances, and it's kind of opens people up to it. But more importantly, it opens that conversation where like normal people will talk about dead people and ghosts, and it brings that question, well, what does happen when we die? It's kind of like full circle. But I think, TV shows like that, they can be a bit naff and a bit full of entertainment rather than, what we would like it to be about. But I do think, they are important because they get everybody talking about it, which could only be, I think, a good thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, you're tired of talking about the pandemic and a lockdown. Cool, let's talk about the paranormal, because you could go days and weeks and months.
Years, centuries. That's what it's talking about. We're over the pandemic now. Come on, let's talk about ghosts and paranormal. But it's just exciting. I really, really do think it is. I absolutely love it. But you've had so many stories, Patrick. You've introduced and interviewed so many different psychics and mediums. Is there a story, like a standout story, that you can think of right now that you kind of think, wow, that was amazing?
Of my experiences, or from the interviews?
Yeah, from the interviews, yeah.
I would say that it wasn't necessarily a paranormal experience that was shared, but my interview with Guy Lyon Playfair, who I'm sure you're familiar with, in the UK. I have lots of UK friends. I have so many people from the UK that I love to interview.
I love it. Claire Broad.
Yes, I love Claire Broad. Oh, yeah. So when I interviewed Guy Lyon Playfair, of course, and he was one of the first kind of bigger, more respected personalities, I guess, that I interviewed. And I was so nervous. I was so intimidated. And, of course, he's passed away now. But when I called, I'm thinking, I'm going to have to be, he's this really old guy, and I'm going to want to gush over everything that he's done. Does he really care to talk to me? And I'm sure he's done a million interviews, and he was so funny. And this is a funny story I've told several times, but I called and I said, okay, I told him, what to expect, and this is how I would like the interview to go. And he said, well, hang on, let me just crawl into my box. And I was like, what? Like a box? He's like, yes, I have no, he didn't say, let me crawl into my box. He said, I'm just going to go into my studio. And I was like, shut up. You have a studio? That's cool. And I have this all in a recording. It's funny. And he's like, well, no, it's just a box. And I'm like, a box? And he's like, yeah, it's just a cardboard box. And I was like, a cardboard box? And he finally, his patience was running thin. He's like, I stick my head in a box and it blocks out the sound from the... So I'm sitting here picturing, Guy Lyon Playfair chilling in his living room with just a cardboard box over his head and a microphone, doing the interview. And that's how it started. And I was like, thank you for that, because it just made it so much more lighthearted. And he was the most beautiful person to interview. And I loved that interview. It was amazing. So I always refer back to that moment. That was really cool.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Good for, the viewers and listeners to know, a standout one for you. And it sounds amazing. I can just picture it right now, just like the head in a box. But that's it. If you get the right sound, that's what it's all about, Patrick. You know that.
Yeah, I try.
That's what it's about. I love it. I love it. Well, one thing about researching you as well, because, we all do our job, like to get to know who we're interviewing. You like cemetery photography.
I do love cemetery photography.
I've never heard of that in my life.
Really? Well, yeah. I don't know if it's really a thing or if it's just something I called it. But I love walking around cemeteries, especially the older the cemetery is, or like I don't know what you would refer to them as there, but like park cemeteries or the really beautiful ones. And sometimes cemeteries that are to most people lost. And I love them. And I don't, a lot of people go in and they do genealogy and things like that. I don't do so much of that. I just love to capture the beauty. I love to find the strangest headstone, the oldest headstone, and just take photos. And I'm not trained in photography at all, but I interviewed a woman in my second episode, actually, of the podcast, and she is a photographer, and she has the most beautiful cemetery photography. She had a page for a long time on Facebook called Historic Cemeteries. I'm sure it's still there. And I'm brain farting on her name right now. But it had really inspired me. And so for a few years, I went around, with my iPhone taking photos of different things in cemeteries. And then I got a, DSLR camera and started learning how to use it. And for a couple of years, I was really, I'm like, is this something I'm going to start doing? And so, on a nice weekend, especially in the fall or even in the winter, with snow, going to cemeteries and discovering cemeteries. And let me tell you, I can be on a road trip. I can be heading in some random destination on a highway in the middle of nowhere. I can spot an old cemetery, off in the distance. And, depending on if my husband's with me or whatever, it's like, and I like find an exit and I'm driving looking for it. And I've found a few of those and it's like, this is so cool. I get proud of myself because I discovered a cemetery. But I love getting the photos and posting them and sharing because some people, it's like a hidden world that they never think about. And some people are like, well, that's really creepy. I'm like, what? It's beautiful. It's just about beauty to me. And it's made me wonder, when I die, it's like, am I going to be cremated? I think I probably would more realistically be cremated, but I would love to be buried also in one of these old forgotten cemeteries, like on the top of a hill next to a big tree. Part of me selfishly wants to be buried in one of those places, the first burial in, 100 years to be buried in one of those cemeteries. But I don't know, that's kind of dorky too.
No, it's cool. It's cool, but you see it with different eyes, and that's the thing. But it's bringing a warmness to a cemetery, and like you were saying, a lost world, really. So, people sometimes do think of cemeteries, a bit, they only go there to mourn, and it's a sad place. But you're seeing it through different eyes, which I kind of think's a bit beautiful within that way. I think that makes me a bit geeky as well, but I think that's kind of cool. I like that, Patrick. I do. I really, really do. Well, back to the podcast. I mean, why do you think a podcast like the Big Séance Podcast, is such an important conversation, in today's world more than ever?
In today's world, I would go back to, I didn't do it very long, but the paranormal investigation, my big focus was, I didn't want to do it just for fun. I didn't want to do it, because it was the trendy, cool thing to do. A lot of groups, especially nowadays, since the paranormal is so huge now, and there are so many paranormal groups out, to go out and investigate, they have to pay a location to let them go investigate. Or it's more like, going bowling. It's like an activity that people do for fun. And I refused to get into that because I want to be here to be able to help people. And it kind of got saturated with groups and things. And so we stopped getting calls for things like that. And it was a little awkward because I would respond to someone or a family and you walk into some strange situations sometimes that you wish you hadn't seen. And one of the last investigations I did, it was on my own. I would go on my own sometimes, which is probably a mistake. And you see some home situations that sometimes aren't the greatest. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm a recluse, kind of, I'm not a social person hugely outside of, this box or my job. And what I got out of that is I wanted to help people. Well, even if I never met the people, I used to respond to a lot of emails from people or parents who would have questions. And they're like, I found you online and I had some questions. I'm not really sure I want to do an investigation yet, but this stuff is happening and it's traumatizing and even if I didn't have a solution for them, even if I didn't really know exactly what was going on, just them speaking to me or just me replying to their email, or maybe not even my reply, just the act of them typing the email or placing the call and talking to me made them feel better, because what they want to know is that people don't think they're crazy. Is this thing really, I didn't sign up for this paranormal thing. I'm not interested in hauntings, but it's happening. Am I crazy? If a haunting or a paranormal event happens to a paranerd, like me or you, or, that's going to be something completely different because we have a little background with it. But to someone who's just thrust into it, that's, I think, one of the first questions they have. Am I crazy? And I have had a lot of people reach out to me who listen to the podcast saying, thank you for this outlet, because I don't have people around me in my world who, are open to talking about this thing. And I think that for a lot of people, that's what I'm happy to have it be, is just a place where you can go to get comfort, or, there's a lot of nerdy stuff too, just to have fun. But if it makes them realize that this stuff is real and that it happens, then awesome.
It is awesome, and what a great thing to be doing as well, Patrick. It really, really is. I absolutely love it. So, are you a full believer of spirit, Patrick?
Oh gosh, I go back and forth. I am pretty confident that, well, let me break it up. I'm pretty confident that there's another side. I don't know that I'm going to say 100%, but I'm pretty confident that something is going to continue after I die. I am very skeptic about a lot of evidence and, video and EVP, which I've been fascinated with. I've done a lot of EVP stuff too. And I've tried a lot of tools, and I'm obsessed with a lot of the paranormal tools and Ouija boards, and I love working with them. But then I'm going to sit there and, half of my brain, and this is, my listeners know this, half of my brain is like, oh my gosh, I want this to be for real paranormal. This is awesome. And the other half of my brain is like, girl, please, you have lost your mind. And it's going to, talk all of those things down. And so I hate that. Like I'm fighting with myself all the time. But it's like a discussion in my own head. It's weird. It's like psychotic. But I'm pretty confident about there being another side. And I don't have any psychic abilities myself. I don't know these things from experience. Not that haven't tried, because I've tried everything. But just from what I know, from what I've read, from the people I talk to and interview and friends in the community, I am pretty confident that there is life on the other side.
Yeah, so exciting. Well, Patrick, the Big Séance Podcast, it's bringing the spiritual community together, which it has, me and you, many people around the world as well. What do you love most about it?
About the Big Séance Podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, I love the connections that I've gotten. Like, connecting with you, connecting with Claire Broad, Guyline Playfair, Uri Geller. Like, how else do you get to talk to Uri Geller?
So cool.
That was a surreal day too. Some celebrities, and if I have an issue myself, or if I have my own question about the paranormal, I have some connections now that I can go to and bug. And if it weren't for my podcast, how else would I just have, such a quick contact? The other thing is, just with listeners of my podcast and many guests too, but I have a Facebook group that has grown pretty quickly, and I have some really smart listeners. I have psychics and mediums who are listeners in that group. And a lot of times when people write to me and say, hey, I'm not sure what's going on, can you tell me something, or do you have any advice for this? I'm like, dude, come join the Big Séance Parlor on Facebook, because there's so many knowledgeable people in there, and so many, experts, and a lot of the guests that I've interviewed, and somebody will jump on it. Now you might get some advice too that's like, take that with a grain of salt, like I don't know how many people would roll their eyes and make fun of me, but there's some people in there that'll probably tell you the unicorns and fairies and and Bigfoot could help you out too, and that's okay. I'm open to that, but like seriously, take some things with a grain of salt. But if it helps, then cool. If you get something, an answer or some help, and you're open to that, and it makes things better, then sweet. Connection. That's my answer.
It's so good, Patrick. It really, really is. Well, thank you, Patrick Keller, for being on Keep It Spiritual podcast and show. Thank you very much.
Yay, you rock. Thank you for having me on.
Well, what a guy he is. I told you would love him. I told you. Well, that was the fabulous Patrick Keller from the Big Séance Podcast. Make sure you go and check it out. It's in the description below. Listen to all the episodes because every single one will leave you wanting more. I promise you that. But of course, he's just a fabulous guy, isn't he? Within that. But I'm sure, we're going to have the lovely Patrick Keller on Keep It Spiritual again and again and again because it's fabulous. And did you hear out the shout out for the lovely medium Claire Broad as well? I'll put her in the description as well because why not? We love Claire Broad here. Of course we do. Right, thank you so much for watching this episode of Keep It Spiritual. Remember, on Friday at 6 o'clock I will be having my spiritual loves, so make sure you check that out. That'll be 6 o'clock premiering right here on YouTube. Until then, I'll see you later.